Hi, everybody. It's me, Miss Amber, and I'm here with your English 12A live lesson. Now, we're almost done with the first unit of the class, so I just want to tackle that last lesson so we can move on to the next one, okay? So I'm going to start sharing my screen and just get straight into it. This is English 12A. We've gone through all of these, and now we're on the development of theater. So just like some of the other tutorials, we're going to get started on slide 5. Now, most of this is pretty much the history of theater. That's pretty much what this entire tutorial is. It gives you the background on theater and how it developed over time. And you would be surprised to find out that most of the development that we've had in terms of theater and drama has been due to the Catholic Church, actually. So just summarizing what's on this slide, early drama developed from religious rituals that were based in Greek culture. Now, some of you might be familiar with Dionysus. That's the god of wine, libations, partying, and harvest. He was a harvest god as well. But basically, there was a festival thrown in his name that included drama competitions. And this is where we got tragedies and comedies, which were introduced later. They were basically, at first, stories that were supposed to bring on catharsis. Catharsis is the feeling of relief through watching someone else suffer, basically. So it says, or a purging of emotions such as pity and fear. And this is also the origin, not just of plays, but also of movies as well. Being able to see yourself in a character in a scenario and process those emotions within yourself, making you think about the deeper meaning of those emotions related to yourself. All of those things were part of this religious ceremony. Comedies were originally to provoke laughter, of course, but they came later than tragedies. And comedies back then in the Greek period were closer to film comedies, where the goal is to try to come of age or seek out a goal and deal with a bunch of mishaps to get there. This was closer to that. So Greek tragedies always ended on a sad note, and comedies always ended up happily with somebody reaching their goal. Now they give you some information in here about stock characters. Now stock characters is basically what it sounds like, a character that fits a stereotype or an archetype that you can recognize. Now every age and every generation has archetypes that they know based on the media that they were raised watching, and also just based on stereotypes for people that were known to exist in the world. So here they basically give you that definition. They're common social and cultural stereotypes, and they originated in early Greek plays and were easily recognizable to audiences. That's the goal of a stock character, to have traits that people recognize. Now, the origins for stock characters are in here too. The long and short of it is that Greek playwrights, excuse me, depicted mythological creatures as stock characters. So Hephaestus, for example, the god of fire and blacksmiths, was known as a foolish character, so like a jester character. And the second thing to know about this is that Aristophanes, this is that complicated name right there, was very well known for introducing lots of different stock characters that people may recognize today. So the bragging imposter, so the guy who is super confident but hiding the fact that he's like a fake. The fool is one of the stereotypes, general stereotypes that he introduced. So he basically moved those characters away from gods and made them regular people that just show up in these works. And let's see, Plautus also introduced many more stock characters. That's this name right here. The miserly old man. So miserly just means you're stingy with money. So like think, Scrooge. So like the character archetype for Scrooge was something that Plautus brought up. And he introduced a lot of other ones that they list here. Now here they tell you about how the Catholic Church starts to become involved. So thinking back to the history of things the history of things as we know in English so far. We know that the Romans are the ones who were originally ruling over Britain, then they left, and the Germans from the north came in, or I'm sorry, the Vikings came in, and then they were driven off by the Germans. There's a lot of cultural exchanges here. But after the Catholic Church started spreading Christianity to England, the church didn't really approve of theater since it was based in, a religious ceremony that wasn't Christian in nature. So they viewed actors as bad people with low morals, and they didn't think that these ritual drama performances sent the right messages. So how do we get to the point where the Catholic Church is the reason why drama spreads? Well, there's a little bit of a journey to get there, and they try to explain it to you in the next couple slides. So basically, during the medieval period, so that's the period that Gawain and the Green Knight and the Canterbury Tales came in, there was a lot of corruption in the church. There were a lot of people using the church and its teachings, and also just the power of the church at the time. Because remember, the church rivaled the crown for power and influence, especially in England, but also in other places. So basically, there were a lot of people who were doubting the church. If you recall from the Canterbury Tales history and backstory, Thomas à Becket was one of those people trying to block the king from being able to judge and try people from the church. So with all of this stuff going on, the church didn't really have a good name or reputation for itself at this time. So the Catholic Church didn't really address any of those concerns. They didn't really see people pointing out the corruption and stuff and do anything about it. They were just kind of like, well, we're all blessed by God, so we're just we'll figure it out in private, and we don't have to tell you anything. So a lot of Christians didn't see their church members or church clergymen as being true leaders or moral authorities, since they knew that some people in the church not only couldn't be trusted, but weren't being dealt with as people who were breaking religious law. Even though all of this was going on, England didn't really stop being Christian. Like, people didn't convert or move into any other belief systems. They just didn't trust the church. So religion was still a very strong influence on people. They just didn't have any faith in the institution. So at this point, there's a little bit of history in terms of the Protestants and Pilgrims splitting off from the Catholic Church to form their own sects of Christianity. So they believed in the values, but just not in the people who were ruling the church. So they sought out new leaders and they broke away. So once people started doing that, popularity for Christianity started coming back up. But instead of Catholic, it was very firmly just Christian and not specifically Catholic. So arriving at the end of the explanation, the Catholic Church started putting on plays, and they were called tropes at the time, to give people information about the church and try to change their reputation in the eyes of the people who were watching. So they knew that people found performers popular, like traveling singers and jugglers and people who could do tricks were very popular at this time. So the Catholic Church decided to do the tropes performances to combine their teachings with something that was popular, which was performance. So in the beginning, tropes were just chanted commentaries that were added to the church service that explained or embellished things. So you have to remember that Catholic Church services mostly had to do with the rites and the rituals. There wasn't a whole lot of like long sermons the way that we know in different denominations of Christianity or in other aspects of Judaism, such as Islam. So sermons and that sort of thing weren't quite as like they weren't employed the same way. They weren't used the same way that they are now. So these tropes were chanted commentaries that were added to the service that embellished the text. So by embellish, they mean add more colorful detail. So instead of short chants in the beginning, they became so popular over time that they developed into short plays. That's how they got started in that. Tropes brought the Bible to life, it says here, and made religious services more interesting, especially for those who did not understand Latin, which was the language of the church. And that's another thing that's actually important at the time. Latin was in fact considered the church's language, and to understand most of the things that people were saying, you had to actually know Latin. There was a transition at this point, as we learned, with Canterbury Tales and Gawain and the Green Knight. People were moving away from that language into English, which was more of the commoner language at the time. But it took a while to get there. And for a long time, the church worked exclusively in Latin. If you didn't know Latin, then you just weren't going to understand anything in the church. And that's part of the reason why people in the church were considered, like well educated and things like that, because you had to know Latin to survive and work for the church, survive in a church environment and work for the church. Now, these tropes were so popular that church services became overcrowded. So they needed more space, and they became outdoor performances. So people started traveling to perform on behalf of the church. And this transformed into the two baby versions of the drama and plays that we have today, which are mystery plays and miracle plays. Oh, did we get? Nope. Okay. So on slide 10, we get more information about the mystery plays and the miracle plays. So mystery plays came first, and they basically gave people the entire biblical history from start to finish, from the creation of the world to Revelations at the end of time, so far as Christians knew it at the time. So these plays came out in series. So there was like basically episodes from beginning to end. And they were performed in different locations around town. One cool thing about this is that once they started basically being plays and performances, craftspeople and people who do like props and other stuff, trade guilds, people who work hard, work with their hands, had to show up, and more of them were attracted to areas that had these sort of mystery plays, because they were able to get work. They were able to build sets and places for these people to perform. So this is the beginning of how like backstage hands and other performing related stuff that's not just acting became involved with these plays. So this is the origin basically of theater right here. So mystery plays were a serious thing. They were about stories that were in the Bible pretty much from beginning to end. So the entire point was education. Here's what's in the Bible, especially for people who don't know Latin and who can't read it. But as the performances became more popular, they increased in the number of people who were performing them. And the people who were attending them gathered like large crowds. So then people who showed up in certain performances started becoming popular. People would actually follow very specific actors and actresses, mostly actors though, that showed up for these performances. It would actually follow them, like around and talk about how good their performances are. So these are like the very first like conventional, traditional like actors in terms of what we could recognize today. So different performers, as they were called at this time, had to compete for attention. And because the environment became competitive, people started, like picking which plays they liked the most. And of course, they preferred the ones that had like that little extra oomph of entertainment, the ones that were slightly funny or had a little bit of flair. So miracle plays developed because people wanted more entertaining plays. Miracle plays were still religious. They were still about um, the church and what they do, but they offered more plots and story than just what was in the Bible. So it says here, for instance, common miracle plays depicted the lives of saints or popular church figures. So this is how we got, like church related celebrities from so you would have like a saint or like a bishop or something, and people want to know more about the lives of this particular person. So people would put on a play showing you, oh well, this person is a miracle worker and he was able to do this and heal this person and he experienced this. Like they dramatize the lives of people in the church, the same way that we have like movies and stuff like Joan of Arc and stuff like that. They basically did this but for older figures. And because people enjoy the entertainment aspect of these plays, they started including comedy instead of just being serious all the time. And they started using stock characters in this as well. So they pretty much came around full circle around to what the Romans were doing in the first place, except they had transformed it into something that was Christian and not related to the Greek gods at all. So, for example, the stock character for like a jester or someone who gets made fun of was the devil, obviously, because the devil is bad. So we want to see, like bad or unfortunate things happen to him and take joy in that. So that was the kind of stock characters that they had at that time. It also says by the end of the 16th century, so remember, just in case, pro tip, if you're trying to figure out what set of years that is, take that number 16, subtract 1, that gives us with 15, and then add 2 zeros to the end. So the 16th century is the 1500s. So by the 1500s, comedic elements were common in both mystery and miracle plays. So you could find humor in both of those in the 500s or 1500s, I'm sorry. Okay, so then we get to the next step. The next step here is morality plays. So morality plays were performed outdoors, just like mystery plays and miracle plays. So they took place in town squares and were popular during the 15th and 16th centuries. But these were not based on stories from the Bible. So basically, people saw that the church performances were very popular. And they were like, oh, well, would this be popular if we did a play about something that wasn't related to teaching necessarily? So these plays focused on the conflict between good and evil, the sort of stuff that we kind of see today. So they did also educate, but it was less like, here's information from the Bible and more, how does this stuff apply to you? What can you do in your life as a regular person to make sure that you get accepted into heaven? So this is basically where we end up in like a short intersection between like things that we can see in Christianity today, like especially Baptist, Episcopalian, that kind of stuff, where we get performative sermons, where you get advice about what to do in difficult situations through the lessons that are in the Bible. So this is where this sort of began. We get the what must I do to be saved? Here are examples in these performances. Here are examples of things that you can do as a normal human that'll help your life improve and your soul improve so that you can be accepted into heaven in the afterlife. Now, morality plays had a very strict formula, even though they didn't follow what miracle plays or mystery plays did. So in these plays, they basically had characters that were the personified version of different vices, virtues, and abstract ideas. That's what it says right here. Characters in morality plays were the personification of vices, virtues, and other abstract ideas. So, and then they remind you what personification is. It's a technique sometimes called anthropomorphism, And that's when you use to give human feelings and actions to animals. Involves giving human qualities to animals and inanimate objects or concepts. So anthropomorphism is just when you give an animal human traits, but sometimes you can give human traits to other things. Like we don't think about it very hard, but if you look at TV and movies, sometimes we have toys that come to life. Sometimes we have objects that come to life, or we'll see like different uh, just people imagining pieces of paper with like eyes that can speak to you, and like all those sort of things that you see like in children's cartoons. That's what personification is. We know that those things are not actually alive and it's not possible for them to be, but if you deliver a story through them, sometimes it's just considered like more fun and easier to grasp than if you just had humans doing those things. So in morality plays, they would basically have characters that represent aspects of human emotion and experience. So you would have a character, think of like the, oh shoot, what is that film? Think of like the Joy movie with the girl's psyche. You get to go in her head and see what kind of like what sort of attitude her different emotions have. This was basically like that. So you would have characters in these plays that represent things like uh, God, or you would have one single person that represents your like the concept of family, or one person that represents sin, for example. So when the devil shows up in TV shows or movies, you know he's bad. That's it. He represents everything that's bad or sinful in the world. Obviously, there are other people in the world that perpetuate these things, but this character is just supposed to represent the idea of that in this play. So the things that happen to that character or between that character and other characters represents relationships between big groups in the world. Instead of hiring, you know, like a bunch of people to play different characters that do bad things, you can just say, well, this is the idea of badness. So let's see what it's about and what it does. And that's what these morality plays were. They show good versus evil through stock characters that represented big ideas. So I give you an example about what personification is, just in case you didn't understand, because it's pretty much seen everywhere, as I pointed out. So, for example, in John Keats' To Autumn, the autumn is personified as sitting careless on a granary floor. Obviously, autumn is a season. It's not a person, but it can't actually sit anywhere. But by describing it as that, you're painting a picture of an attitude. If someone is sitting carelessly, it seems like they're not involved in what's going on. They're not invested. Sitting careless on a granary floor. Granary is where people store grain in the summer, right before harvest. So they're showing the association between the season and people harvesting grain. And that's why they're together in that sentence like that. So when you give inanimate objects or ideas, like different traits like that, you can kind of paint a picture for the person who's reading. It's the same as whenever you see Mother Nature or Father Winter, those kind of things. Now we know that spring and winter are not people, but if we show them as people or talk about them as people, we can use this more descriptive language to describe how we feel about what they're doing. And they did this basically in morality plays with those stereotypes. Okay. So then we move on to allegory. That's what slide 13 is about. It's all about allegory. The reading selection for this lesson is an allegory, so they're just giving you information on it. So an allegory is basically when you have a specific kind of story that has this personification in it. So in an allegory, dramatic characters are symbolic of an abstract concept. So personification is when you describe something with human traits, but an allegory is when you have a whole story that is a symbol for something that's happening in the world. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. Personification is when you write or read about inanimate objects having human traits. It's when you have it written down and you can actually read it. An allegory is when the entire story is based around every character being a symbol. So every character is personified. You know, in a poem, you can have personification. You can literally just write about Autumn sitting carelessly in a granary, right? But it's just that one thing, that one topic. In an allegory, every character represents something. Just to reiterate, in a naive allegory, the characters, locations, objects, and actions are all personifications of an abstract idea. So they all are. The characters in the play, and by the play they mean morality plays and naive allegories, they are not based on real people. They exist only to communicate a specific concept. So morality plays were allegories, specifically naive allegories. It says here, morality plays were more specifically known as naive allegories, just to clear it up. And another feature of morality plays is that most of the authors chose to be anonymous. This paragraph right here just talks about a lot of the people who did work for the church at this time, not just for these sort of plays, but also for building cathedrals, doing glass stained windows. Pretty much any work that was produced by them, they stayed anonymous because they didn't want to take glory away from God. And I mean, you'll hear that all the time now. There people are like, you know, this wasn't me that did this. I did this through the grace of God. It was the same at this time period as it is now. Okay, so let me get into the reading. Now, you know, I don't do the excerpts because they're longer than I have time to do in these lessons, but I will go over this and a couple of the other slides that give you a little more information about it. So Everyman, that's the name of the play. It's a morality play, and it's the best known example of a morality play. It was written in the late 15th century by an unknown author, so we don't know who he is. But we do know that he probably translated it from an earlier Flemish play, judging by similarities that historians have found between Everyman and other plays found in other places. It's been translated into other languages by now, and this particular play is so famous that people still perform it today. You can actually look it up and find a theater that's doing it, and just to go see the performance. That's how famous it is. Now, the play is filled with a lot of symbolic characters. It is a morality play, so every character represents something. So the example I give you here is such as sloth and death, whose traits are associated with the ideas they represent. So usually in these sort of plays, the characters are named after what they represent to make it easier for the audience to follow along. So sloth and death represent sloth, which is laziness, and death, which is, you know, the concept of dying. It wouldn't make sense to name death like Percy or something like that. So back in the day, people weren't trying to make things that complicated the way that we do now with books. They just wanted to get their message across as quickly and efficiently as possible. So everyone's named after what they represent. That makes it pretty simple to understand what's going on. So they give you a list of all the characters. We have the everyman. There's a messenger who delivers the play's message to the audience. So that's like a narrator kind of thing. We have God, who is a just and merciful creator of all things. We have death, who's summoned by God to go after every man. And then we have a list of other characters: fellowship, kindred, cousins, goods, good deeds, knowledge, confession, beauty, strength, discretion, and five wits. So these are all characters that every man knows and turns to for help. And they're supposed to represent exactly the label that's on the tin. Fellowship represents fellowship. Cousin represents cousins, people who are in your family. So then we have angel, who takes every man's soul to heaven, and a doctor who summarizes the message for the audience at the end of the play. Now, they pretty much give you a summary of everything that happens here, and it's in pretty plain language. So I'm not going to comb through it here with a fine tooth comb, but I will say that in general, the play wants you to remember that your actions and the decisions that you make are important because you will die eventually and have to face the consequences of your actions. So every man pretty much is supposed to represent the average person, the everyday person. That's why the play is called Everyman. He is a sinful person. He's steeped in sin. He's been unrepentant. But God sends death to find every man and pretty much kill him because he's like, ah, man, you've done too much. It's one or two things, sure, maybe, but you've done all the sins. We can't do that. So you got to go. And the play is pretty much every man going to different people in his life that represent better things than what he's been up to and trying to get help so that he can thwart death and postpone it, and look back on his life and figure out how he can repent for all the things that he's done. That's the gist of it. Any other details you can find on that slide. Is not a difficult play to understand at all. Now on slide 20, we get into themes. So we've talked about a couple of them already. I've mentioned them casually just from the last slide. The main theme is memento mori, which is remember that you will die, remember death. It's important to remember that death is inevitable. So you have to live as though you are going to die soon because you don't know when you are going to die. And the idea is that by living your life that way, you will always make better choices instead of living like, oh, well, I can make up for whatever I've done forever, because you don't actually know if that's true. Other themes include salvation, because every man is seeking to be forgiven for the stuff that he's done. And one of the big questions that's brought up in this play, you should pay attention to it while you're reading, is the question of whether or not people are saved by their own actions or through God's grace. Now, we have these same questions today. You know, if God knows everything that happens, did he plan for things to happen the way that they're happening? He's just watching them play out. Were we given free will to be able to, like, change our fate within certain means? So even back then, even in the 1400s and the 1500s, people were grappling with these questions and trying to provide answers and comfort to people who were unsure about what to do to be a good person or to turn around lives that weren't great. Because, not everyone is born a Christian and taught those things. Some people grow up in other cultures or in other countries where the religion is different, and they convert and they're like, what can I do if I've lived, like this sort of life? Some people just grow up rough and they are awful people who are seeking to be better. So these plays are for people like them and addresses those kind of questions. A third theme is abandonment and loneliness. And that's just due to the interactions that every man has with the other people and concepts in the play. Everyone is very quick to point out, like, well, yeah, maybe death's coming after you, and that's not great. But guess who got you into this position? It's you, my guy. It's you. So they definitely deal with how that and every man's behavior in life comes back to kind of like bite him in the butt. And I actually think that that's it. Every Man is a pretty simple play. It's written in older language, so you might have to take your time reading it. They do try to give you the modern updated version of these. Yeah, okay. So they do try to give you the modern and updated version of these, but you may have a little trouble with it anyway, so take your time. As always, if you need any help with getting through the reading selection, please book a tutoring session. If you don't have the link for booking a tutoring session yourself, please reach out to your advocate or your mentor to get that link information so you can get into tutoring as quick as possible. These lessons are just a short overview of the tutorial to try to break things down in a slightly different way, so you can get like a sort of everyday language version of it. But yeah, if you're having trouble with the readings themselves, you need someone to go over just the readings with you, please book a tutoring session. You can reach out to me or Miss Kathy Vahovic. When you talk to your mentor or advocate, they'll let you know who is available at what times to help you pick who's best for you. But this was a pretty simple one. There's not a whole lot of complicated stuff here. You will probably have a lot of things in your notes because there was quite a bit of history in here in terms of just the details of the morality plays, the miracle plays, the mystery plays, and just information about the church. You're going to have some questions about this on the mastery test. So don't skip those portions. Just take your time, write down the information that's actually new, and you should be fine. Okay, that's about it for me today. This is Miss Amber signing off, and good luck with your English class.